Okay, so you think you understand Uber. You've used the app, you've watched the little car icon crawl toward your PIN, you've paid the fare and stepped out without a word to anyone. Simple, clean, obvious. A taxi company for the smartphone age. Except Uber is not a taxi company. It doesn't own the cars, it doesn't employ the drivers, it doesn't maintain a single vehicle, and yet it processed over $190 billion in total transactions in fiscal year 2025 alone. So the question isn't just how Uber makes money. The question is how a company with almost no physical assets became one of the most valuable transportation businesses in human history. The answer has nothing to do with rides. Before Uber existed, getting from one place to another in a city was a negotiation with chaos. You stood on a corner with your arm raised, hoping a cab happened to drive past. You called a dispatch number and were told a car would arrive in 15 to 30 minutes, which meant anywhere from 10 minutes to never. When the car finally showed up, you had no idea what the ride would cost until the meter stopped. You paid in cash, you had no way to rate the driver, no way to report a problem, no record of the trip, and the driver had no way to find you efficiently either. They were just circling blocks, burning fuel, waiting for someone to flag them down. The whole thing was a mess of wasted time, wasted fuel, and information that never reached the people who needed it. Then smartphones arrived with GPS chips, mobile broadband, and digital payment rails. And someone asked a question that now seems obvious in retrospect. What if a driver could see exactly where you are, and you could see exactly where the driver is, and the whole transaction could happen before either of you said a single word? That question became Uber. And that simple shift, from hailing with your arm to pressing a button, didn't just improve the experience. It unlocked an entirely new economic structure. The average car sits unused roughly 95% of its life. Uber figured out how to turn that idle asset into a revenue-generating machine for its owner, without ever touching the asset itself. Here's how that works in practice. Walk through a single ride from the moment you open the app. You type in your destination. Uber's algorithm, running on servers thousands of miles away, queries a spatial index of every available driver within a radius of your location, calculates estimated arrival times, predicts the probability each driver will accept the trip, and surfaces the best match, all in under 2 seconds. The driver gets a notification with the pickup location and upfront pay details. They accept. The car moves toward you in real time, visible on your screen. The trip happens, you arrive. Your saved payment method is charged automatically. Uber takes its commission. The driver gets the rest. At no point did Uber need to own a car, employ a mechanic, rent a garage, or pay a fuel bill. What Uber sold in that transaction wasn't transportation. It sold a match. It connected supply with demand in real time, took a percentage for doing so, and moved on to the next match. That distinction, marketplace versus transit company, changes absolutely everything about how the economics work. Think of it this way. Riders need drivers. Drivers need riders. Neither group can function without the other. Uber makes it dramatically easier for both groups to find each other, and it charges for the privilege. The more drivers on the platform, the shorter the wait times. The shorter the wait times, the more riders join. The more riders join, the more trips drivers complete per hour. The more per hour earnings available, the more drivers join. Around and around it goes, each side of the market making the other side more valuable, compounding continuously as the network grows. This is the engine that powers Uber. Not software, not brand recognition, not venture capital. A self-reinforcing marketplace loop where every new participant makes the whole system more efficient for everyone already inside it. Economists call this a cross-side network effect. And it is Uber's single most powerful competitive weapon, because it is almost impossible to replicate once one platform achieves density. Here's why. Imagine a competitor tries to launch a ride-hailing app in a city where Uber already has 10,000 active drivers. That competitor starts with 0. Riders on the new app wait 8 minutes for a car, while Uber riders wait 90 seconds. Drivers on the new app sit idle between trips, while Uber drivers complete 3 rides an hour. Even if the competitor has a better interface, lower fees, and friendlier support, it loses, because the network itself is the product, and you can't fake network density. Legacy taxi systems had no answer to this. A radio dispatch center covering one city's worth of cabs couldn't match the microsecond geospatial pairing that Uber's algorithm performs across an entire metropolitan area. Every new driver who joined Uber made the system faster and more reliable. Every new rider increased driver utilization and income. The gap widened until competitors were fighting over what Uber left behind. Now, here's where the story gets complicated, because Uber built one other mechanism on top of this network that customers absolutely hate and economists quietly admire: dynamic pricing. When demand in a specific zone exceeds available driver supply, during a rainstorm, after a concert, on New Year's Eve, an algorithm applies a price multiplier to the base fare. Prices go up, sometimes significantly. Your phone shows you the surge before you confirm. You can wait it out or pay the premium. From the customer's perspective, this feels like being exploited at your most vulnerable moment. From an economic perspective, it is performing two critical functions simultaneously. Higher prices discourage the most price-sensitive riders from booking right now, freeing up the limited supply for those who genuinely need a ride urgently. And higher prices incentivize off-duty drivers in adjacent neighborhoods to log on and move toward the surge zone, increasing supply precisely where demand is highest. Research published by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that without surge pricing, platform completion rates collapse during demand spikes. Drivers get sent on longer and longer pickup journeys, wasting time between trips, until the system seizes up entirely. Surge pricing prevents that. It is a market-clearing mechanism, not a profiteering one. Even if it rarely feels that way when you're standing in the rain, one more thing on surge pricing that often gets missed. It doesn't just benefit drivers and the platform in the moment. It creates a behavioral feedback loop among the driver population over time. Drivers learn which neighborhoods, which time windows, and which types of events reliably generate surge conditions. They plan their schedules around that knowledge. This self-organizing behavior, thousands of independent contractors routing themselves toward high-demand zones without any central coordinator telling them to do so, is one of the most economically elegant features of the entire platform. Uber doesn't need to dispatch anyone. The pricing signal does it automatically. The revenue model that sits on top of all this is more layered than most people realize. Most viewers assume Uber makes money by taking a cut of each fare. That's true, but it's the beginning of the story, not the whole thing. Start with ride commissions. Uber applies a variable take rate to each trip, the percentage it keeps from the total fare before paying the driver. That rate typically runs between 20 and 30%, depending on market, route, and demand conditions. On top of the base fare, Uber collects a fixed booking fee on each ride to cover insurance reserves and regulatory compliance costs. Then there are airport surcharges, premium fees collected on airport pickups and drop-offs where demand is predictable and high. Cancellation fees, charged to passengers who cancel after a driver is already en route, compensate the driver's wasted time and flow partly to Uber's margin. But here is where it gets interesting. Uber is no longer primarily a ride company, advertising. Uber Journey ads allow brands and merchants to present sponsored content to passengers during their trip. A captive audience, in motion with known origin, destination, and behavioral data. High margin, almost no incremental cost Uber One subscriptions. Riders pay a monthly or annual membership fee in exchange for waived delivery fees and discounted rides. This creates predictable recurring revenue that doesn't depend on any single transaction. Subscription businesses are valued differently from transaction businesses, more like software companies than taxi fleets. Uber Eats commissions. Every restaurant order placed through Uber Eats generates a commission from the merchant, typically running between 15 and 30% of the menu price, plus a delivery fee and service fee from the consumer. The platform is collecting from both sides of every food transaction simultaneously. And then there's Uber Freight, digital brokerage matching commercial trucking capacity with enterprise shippers. And Uber for Business, the corporate travel management platform, and Uber Direct, which white labels Uber's delivery logistics for large retailers. In fiscal year 2025, Uber's total gross bookings, the full dollar value flowing through the platform, crossed $192 billion. Net revenue after driver payouts reached $52 billion. Operating income came in at $5.57 billion. 3 years earlier, that operating income number was essentially zero. The driver who makes all of this possible is not an employee. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in Uber's business model. By classifying drivers as independent contractors, Uber avoids paying minimum wages, health insurance, paid leave, overtime, payroll taxes, or any vehicle-related costs whatsoever. The driver owns the car, fuels the car, insures the car, and absorbs its depreciation. Uber provides the dispatch software and takes the commission. In exchange, the driver gets flexibility, genuine, real flexibility to log on and off at any hour, to work as many or as few hours as they choose, and to use a vehicle they already own as a revenue-generating asset. This model makes Uber infinitely scalable. To add capacity in a new city, Uber doesn't need to acquire vehicles, lease depots, or hire staff. It needs drivers to sign up. That can happen in weeks. A traditional fleet operator would need months and millions of dollars in capital expenditures just to match what Uber can deploy through an app notification. But understanding what drivers actually take home is more complicated than it looks from the outside. A driver's gross earnings per trip combine a base fare with a time component, a distance component, any surge multiplier in effect, applicable bonuses from Uber promotions, and 100% of passenger tips. That number appears in the driver's earnings dashboard and looks reasonable at a glance. Then you subtract the real costs. Fuel, routine maintenance, tires, brakes, oil changes, all accelerated by high mileage. A supplemental ride-hail insurance policy, because personal auto insurance does not cover commercial transportation. Vehicle depreciation, which is the slow, invisible reduction in resale value that every mile driven imposes on the car. And self-employment tax, which drivers pay in full without an employer splitting the cost. Empirical research on ride-hailing microeconomics consistently finds that vehicle costs alone consume between 20 and 40 cents of every dollar earned before taxes. The headline gross earnings and the actual take-home income are often a very different conversation. This tension between what the platform reports as driver earnings and what drivers actually keep after expenses has been at the center of Uber's regulatory battles for over a decade. And we'll get to that. To make this concrete, say a driver completes 20 trips on a Saturday, earning a gross total of $240 before Uber's commission is factored out. That sounds reasonable, but subtract roughly $35 in fuel for the day's mileage. Subtract the prorated daily cost of insurance, because a standard personal auto policy does not cover you while you're working commercially, so you need a supplemental endorsement, which adds real cost per month. Subtract tire wear, brake wear, oil consumption, all accelerated by the constant stop and go of urban driving that rideshare generates far faster than typical commuting. Subtract the daily depreciation on the vehicle, which compounds invisibly with every mile and only becomes visible the day you try to sell a car with 150,000 miles on it. And then subtract self-employment tax, which eats 15.3% of net earnings because there's no employer splitting it. What looked like $240 gross can turn into $90 or $100 actual take-home after a full day of driving. Not nothing, but a very different number than the headline suggests. First, the part that confuses people the most. Uber lost money for years. Not a little money. Billions of dollars. In some quarters, billions of dollars in a single 3-month period. If the platform charges every ride, every delivery, every subscriptions, how is it possible to lose that much money? Because Uber wasn't trying to profit. It was trying to win. In a two-sided marketplace, the platform with the highest network density wins. Building that density in city after city, country after country, requires something that doesn't happen naturally. You have to bribe both sides of the market into joining before the network is valuable enough to attract them on its own. Uber offered passengers artificially low fares, sometimes below the true cost of providing the ride, to build the habit. It offered drivers lucrative sign-up bonuses, guaranteed hourly minimums, and trip completion incentives to build supply density in new markets. It funded aggressive legal defenses in every jurisdiction that tried to block it. It bankrolled simultaneous expansion across dozens of countries with incompatible regulations and wildly different competitive landscapes. All of it was calculated. If Uber could achieve density in a market before a competitor did, the network effect would compound and the competitor's position would become structurally untenable. The losses were, from the board's perspective, an investment in future market power. The competition that actually forced Uber to spend the most was regional. In China, Didi Chuxing had government backing, cultural familiarity, and an existing user base. Uber spent billions trying to break through and ultimately couldn't. So it sold its Chinese operations to Didi in exchange for an equity stake in the company it couldn't beat. Same playbook in Southeast Asia. Uber spent heavily competing against Grab, then sold its regional business to Grab for an equity stake. In the United States, Lyft held on